The late afternoon sun hung low over the Arizona territory, casting long copper shadows across the Harkin Ranch. Abel Harkin had grown used to the stillness of this land, its deliberate silence, its stubborn grit, and the way it held on to heat long after the day was dying. Out here on the rim of Salt River, he lived the kind of lonely life a man didn't choose so much as inherit. The wooden fences he mended every spring, the weather-scarred barn leaning against the wind, the log cabin with its creaking porch. Every piece of the ranch carried the quiet fingerprints of his family. His parents had died years ago, then his younger brother not long after. Abel stayed because leaving felt like abandoning ghosts that still walked these fields. Most days were predictable. Saddle the sorrel mare, check the herd, haul water, mend whatever the desert sun had cracked. Hard work, honest work, but work done in silence. It had been so long since another voice shared the air of this place that he no longer expected one. That evening was hot, thick, breathless heat that clung to the skin. Abel led his mare, Ruby, toward the river so she could drink. Dust swirled around his boots with each step, catching the golden tint of the sunset. The sky burned orange. The water glowed like polished brass, and the whole world felt paused, as if holding its breath. The Salt River murmured softly, a steady, soothing sound. Abel loosened the reins and let Ruby dip her muzzle. He knelt to splash water on his face, listening to the cicadas buzz in the cottonwoods. The quiet was so complete, even the faint splash of a fish could be heard clear as a bell, which made the sudden noise all the more jarring. A sharp rustle, something heavy collapsing into water, snapped Abel upright. Not the skittish movement of a deer, not the thud of a falling branch. Something else, something human. His hand went automatically to the rifle slung across his shoulder. Out here, surprise rarely meant anything good. He stepped toward the tall reeds, boots sinking lightly into the damp sand. Each footstep was careful, deliberate. The heat, the silence, the orange glow. Everything tightened around him as he pushed aside the brush. What he saw froze him in place. A woman, no, a girl barely grown, struggled in the shallows of the river. An Apache. Her dark hair clung to her back in wet strands, and her clothing was torn to shreds, plastered to her body with mud and river water. Blood streaked her shoulder, mixing with grime. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each one shaking her slender frame. She looked up at him. Those eyes, wild, terrified, desperate, cut straight through the fading light. She threw her arms over her chest as if preparing for the worst, shrinking back into the water as though it might swallow her whole. Abel's heart lurched. He knew that look. A hunted animal, a soul pushed beyond fear. He reacted on instinct, pure protective instinct. He tore his gaze away, swiveling his body so fast his boots skidded. Without looking, he shrugged out of his leather coat and held it behind him. "You're all right," he said quietly, voice low and steady. "Take this. I'm not looking." He kept his eyes fixed on the ground, jaw clenched. He heard her breathing, shallow, trembling, then the faint rustle of fabric as she pulled the coat over her shaking body. She didn't speak, didn't trust, but she didn't run either. When Abel finally turned, slowly, she was standing, but barely. Her legs buckled under her. The coat hung heavy on her small frame, swallowing her shoulders. Her skin had the gray-brown pallor of exhaustion, her lips pale, her eyes glassy. She tried to take a step. She collapsed. Abel dropped to one knee and caught her before she hit the sand. Her body was ice-cold despite the heat of the day, trembling violently. "You're hurt," he murmured, more to himself than her. He didn't know her name, didn't know what she'd run from, but the truth was carved all over her. Someone had chased her. Someone had meant her harm. There were boot tracks by the river. There was fear in her eyes, and there was nowhere else for her to go. Abel lifted her gently into his arms. She was featherlight, her breath shallow against his chest. Ruby snorted softly as he approached. Abel secured the girl, Waya, though he didn't yet know her name, across the saddle, then mounted behind her to keep her from slipping. The sky dimmed to purple as he turned toward the ranch. Abel reached his ranch just as the last stripe of daylight slipped behind the red cliffs. The place rose from the desert like a stubborn outpost. Weathered wood, rope coiled along posts, tools hanging beside the barn door, and a long porch sagging under years of sun and storms. Smoke from the morning's fire still lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the dusty scent of dry sage. To most drifters, this land looked harsh, almost unfriendly. To Abel, it was the only safe ground he'd ever known, a world both protective and perilous, depending on who crossed its borders. He slid off Ruby and lowered the fragile Apache girl, Waya, into his arms. Her weight barely shifted the saddle. She clung weakly to the leather coat he'd given her, eyes darting around the yard, as if expecting someone to leap from behind a fence post. Every creak, every rustle of horses in the barn made her shoulders jump. Abel didn't blame her. Out here, the line between danger and mercy was as thin as a horsehair. "It's all right," he murmured, pushing open the cabin door with his foot. "No one's here but me." Inside, the room was warm from a fire he'd banked that morning. Shadows danced along the log walls, lighting up racks of bridles, a rifle mounted above the hearth, and a row of handmade chairs. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. Built by his father, repaired by his own hands, and sturdy enough to weather anything the desert threw at it. Waya's breathing quickened. She scanned every corner, every window, every exit. Her fear pulsed through the air like a taut wire. Abel kept his voice low, gentle. "You can have this room." He nudged the small door near the kitchen. "There's a lock on the inside. Use it if it helps you rest." She stared at him, as if expecting a trick, then slipped inside. He heard the soft click of the lock a moment later. Abel set a pot of water on the stove. His hands worked from habit. Grab the linens, fetch the tin of salve, heat the kettle. But when he knocked lightly on the door and told her he had clean clothes and supplies, she didn't answer. A long pause. Then the lock slid open, just enough for her to peek through. He didn't step closer, just held out the folded shirt and pants on his forearm so she wouldn't have to touch him. "Set him by the door," she whispered. He did. When she reached out, he glimpsed the bruises along her wrist, dark, ugly marks that told a story he didn't need to hear to understand. A few minutes later, she emerged wearing the oversized clothes. There was something heartbreaking about how small she looked inside them. The fabric hung loose over her shoulders, swallowing her frame. She kept distance between them, knees slightly bent, like a deer ready to bolt. Abel knelt a few feet away and laid out the bandages and medicine. "Your feet need tending," he said, nodding to the floor. "You can sit by the fire." She hesitated, hugging her arms to her chest. When he reached gently for her ankle, she jerked back, breath catching in her throat, a flash of raw fear. Abel froze, hands raised. "I won't hurt you. I'll stay right here. You can do it yourself if you'd rather." Waya didn't speak, but after a silent moment, she nodded once, very slight, allowing him to touch her foot. Her skin was torn where the riverbank rocks had cut deep. Blood had dried in streaks. Abel cleaned each wound carefully, making sure she saw every move before he made it. He worked with the same calm patience he used with half-wild horses. She winced when he dabbed the salve, but she didn't pull away again. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Why? Help?" Abel wrapped the bandage gently. "Because you needed it." She studied his face, searching for deception. Whatever she saw there must have eased something inside her, because the tension in her shoulders softened. He didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask who had chased her, or why. That wasn't his way. "You get some rest," he said quietly. "No one gets onto this land unless they go through me first." Her eyes flickered, wary disbelief shifting into something fragile, almost unbelieving. That night, as she lay on the narrow bed behind the locked door, Abel lingered near the fire, listening to the wind scrape across the eaves. The ranch felt different, less empty, less dead. And in the dim room beyond the wall, Waya whispered a soft phrase in her own tongue. A thank you, a prayer. For the first time in many weeks, she slept without gripping a stone for protection. Morning light crept slowly across the Harkin ranch, brushing the porch with a pale gold glow. The night chill still clung to the boards, and a thin mist hovered above the stretch of open land leading to the river. Abel stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee in hand, expecting the same silence that usually greeted him at sunrise. But she was there. Waya sat on the far end of the porch, knees drawn up, wrapped in the worn blanket he'd left by her door. Her dark hair hung loose down her back, still tangled from the river. The sharp fire of the Apache people, usually seen in their fierce, steady gaze, was dulled in her eyes this morning. What remained was sorrow, heavy, bone-deep sorrow. Abel didn't approach too close. He stopped a few feet away and leaned against a post, giving her space. "You slept some," he said softly. She nodded once, not looking up. "Yes." A long quiet settled between them, broken only by the distant cry of a hawk. Abel had learned long ago that silence could heal, or wound, depending on who held it. So he waited, patient as sandstone. Eventually, Waya's fingers tightened around the blanket, and she drew a slow, trembling breath. "My people?" Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "My clan did not make it." Abel straightened, but he didn't interrupt. She kept her eyes fixed on the dry earth beneath the porch. "There were men," she said, swallowing hard. "White men, drunk, riding hard through the night. They came into our camp with guns and fire. They laughed while they shot." She pressed her hand to her chest as if steadying the memory. "Some of us ran. Others had no time." Abel felt a coldness settle in his stomach. Waya's breath wavered. "My mother, my cousins, I do not know where they are now. Some were taken." Her voice tightened, grief shifting into a quiet, controlled fury. "I heard the screams. I saw the flames. I ran. 3 days, barefoot, alone." "You been out there since then?" Abel asked softly. She nodded. 3 sons, 3 nights. No food, no rest." Her fingers shook as she held the blanket tighter. "I kept moving so they would not find me." Abel's jaw tightened. He'd seen brutality in this territory, seen how lawless men treated anyone they thought weaker. But hearing it from her lips, it cut deeper. Waya continued, voice hollow. "By the time I reached the river, I could not walk straight. I went into the water to cool my skin. I thought maybe I would hide there." She blinked slowly, eyes glassy. "That is when they found me." "Those same men?" Abel asked. She shook her head. "Different, but the same kind of evil." Her features darkened, fear and anger braiding together. "They shouted at me, threw rocks, took my clothes from the shore, laughed while I begged them to stop." Her breath trembled. "One said he would come back to get the rest." Abel felt heat rise through him, not rage that burned bright, but the deep, quiet kind that smoldered and sharpened, the kind that made a man dangerous. "They pushed me under," she whispered. "My head hit a stone. When I came up, they were gone. I hid until my body grew cold." She finally lifted her gaze to him, eyes raw, searching, uncertain. "I thought, when you came, you would finish what they started." Abel's chest tightened. "I ain't like them. I know that now." Her voice softened. "You turned away. You gave me covering, food, a place to breathe." She looked down again. "I did not think any white man would help someone like me." Abel crouched slightly, still giving her the space she clung to. "Sometimes the desert grows good men," he said quietly. "Not often, but sometimes." Something in her expression shifted, just a flicker, but real. The smallest lowering of the walls built from fear and exhaustion. For a long moment, they sat together in the morning stillness. 2 people from 2 different worlds, held together by the same thread of loss. Waya shifted, gathering the blanket around her shoulders. "I should go," she murmured, though the words wavered. "I should keep running." She planted her bare foot on the porch plank, meaning to rise. Her leg buckled instantly. Pain shot across her face as she grabbed the post for balance, breath sharp and unsteady. Abel took a half-step forward, instinctive, but he stopped, letting her decide if she wanted his help. Her fingers shook as she clenched the wood. She tried again. Her knees trembled violently this time, refusing to hold her weight. Waya sagged back down onto the step, shaking her head in defeat. She wanted to flee. She wanted to survive. But her wounded body simply would not obey. The desert night had a way of creeping in without warning. One moment the sky still held streaks of burnt orange, and the next it surrendered to a deep, quiet blue. Inside the Harkin cabin, The faint glow of a lantern flickered against the log walls as Abel stirred a pot of corn stew. The warm, earthy smell filled the room, mixing with the dusty scent drifting in from the open window. Waya sat at the table, wrapped in the quilt he'd given her. She watched him with guarded eyes, still skittish but calmer than she'd been that morning. The fire cast soft amber light over her features, turning the hollows beneath her eyes into shadows of exhaustion rather than suspicion. Abel didn't push conversation, just let the peace settle between them like a blanket. He was reaching for the ladle when it happened. A pounding on the door, sharp, violent, shook the cabin like a hammer striking a coffin lid. Waya jolted so hard her chair scraped against the floor. Her breath caught, and she crouched instinctively, one hand gripping the edge of the table. The color drained from her face. Abel's spine straightened. He knew that knock. It wasn't the hesitant knock of a lost traveler or a neighbor in need. It was the kind of knock delivered by men who expected to be obeyed. The pounding came again, harder. He moved to the door quietly, steady as stone. With one hand, he slid his Winchester from the wall peg, holding it down at his side. Not raised, not threatening, but there, prepared. He cracked the door open. 3 men stood on the porch, silhouettes framed by moonlight, their horses stamped restlessly behind them, breath fogging in the chill night air. The men looked rough, faces unshaven, coats dusty, the scent of whiskey hanging faintly around them. The tallest stepped forward, boots creaking on the wooden boards. His eyes were small and mean, scanning Abel's face, then drifting past his shoulder toward the warm light inside. "We're looking for someone," he drawled. "Saw an Apache girl by the river yesterday. Ran off before we could settle things." His grin twisted unpleasantly. "You seen her?" Abel's jaw clenched. He shifted his stance, filling the doorway, blocking their view inside. The barrel of the Winchester gleamed faintly in the lantern light. "No one here by that description," he replied, voice flat as dry earth. The man's gaze sharpened. "Funny, someone saw tracks leading this way." "Tracks don't mean a damn thing," Abel shot back. "This is my land." Another man stepped forward, eyes roaming toward the window where stew simmered on the stove. "Mind if we take a look around? Could be she's hiding. These Apache rats are sneaky." The word hit Abel like a spark tossed into gunpowder. He stepped fully onto the porch, closing the door behind him. The Winchester hung loosely from his hand, but his voice was iron. "No one gets hunted on this property, not by you, not by anyone. Now turn around and ride out." The tall man scoffed. "You protecting her? A filthy savage?" Abel took one more step forward, boots firm on the boards. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous rumble, quiet but heavy, like distant thunder rolling over canyon walls. "I said, get off my land." Something in his tone, raw, unwavering, made even the horses shift uneasily. The 3 men exchanged glances. They weren't afraid of danger. Men like them rarely were. But they also weren't fools. A rancher guarding his home was a different beast entirely. "Fine," the leader muttered, spitting into the dirt. "But if we see her again, she's ours." They mounted their horses, the leather creaking, and turned toward the dark stretch of desert. Their silhouettes grew smaller as they rode off, but the hatred in their eyes lingered like a storm not yet spent. Abel waited until they disappeared beyond the sagebrush before stepping back inside. The second the door shut, Waya collapsed to her knees. Her whole body shook, a violent trembling she couldn't control. Tears spilled freely, dripping onto the floorboards as she tried and failed to quiet her sobs. "I thought," her voice broke, "I thought they would take me again." Abel knelt beside her, not touching her at first, just letting his presence steady the air between them. Then slowly, he placed an arm around her shoulders, firm but gentle, as one might calm a terrified horse. "No one's taking you anywhere," he said softly. "Not while I'm breathing." Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled into his shirt as though she needed something solid to keep from falling apart. And for the first time since she stepped onto his land, she let herself lean into him. The morning after the men rode off, the ranch felt strangely still, as if the land itself was exhaling after holding its breath all night. The sun came up slow, warming the frost off the grass, painting the barn and fences with gentle, honey-colored light. Abel stepped out with a mug of coffee, expecting to find Waya locked in her room, still shaken from what had happened. Instead, he found her crouched by the fire pit outside, coaxing the morning flames to life. She looked over her shoulder when she sensed him, her expression guarded but not frightened. Just tired, just human. "You don't have to work," Abel said, leaning against the porch post. She didn't look up from the kindling. "Work helps the heart stay quiet." He nodded, understanding that better than most. From that day forward, Waya stayed, at first because she needed to, and then because she chose to. It began with small things. She helped him start the fire each morning, stacking the wood neatly, blowing on the embers until they sparked. She moved with a calm, deliberate grace, as if fire was an old friend she trusted. Then she took to cooking simple meals, stirring pots of corn or beans with a focus that kept her thoughts from drifting too far into memory. She washed clothes by the river, slapping the wet fabric against smooth stones, her hair brushing her shoulders as she worked. One afternoon, Abel glanced out toward the corral and nearly dropped his hammer. Waya was in the barn, brushing down Ruby, the mare that didn't let anyone but him come close. But there she was, humming a low tune in Apache, and Ruby leaned into her touch like they'd known each other for years. Another day, Abel found her kneeling in the barn doorway, mending a torn saddle with careful, practiced fingers. She tied knots with the same precision her people used to make snares and tools, the same steady rhythm that had once shaped their survival. By the end of the week, she was helping him pull weeds from the corn rows, her braids swinging with each motion, dust smudged on her cheek. Abel worked beside her, listening as she taught him the Apache word for sky, then earth, then horse. "Sisi," she said softly, patting Ruby's neck. "Horse?" Abel repeated. She smiled, small, fleeting, but real. "Yes, Sisi." He taught her English in return, slow and patient. She'd point to things, rope, axe, cloth, spoon, and he'd name them. She'd repeat the words with a soft, musical accent, sometimes frowning in concentration, sometimes laughing when she mispronounced something, and he corrected her gently. There was a sweetness to those moments, simple but powerful, like two people building a bridge out of words and trust. And then Abel noticed the house changing. It started with the clean floors, swept each morning. Then the pile of tools near the door disappeared, reorganized neatly on hooks. The windows were wiped clear of dust, letting in more light than he remembered. One evening, he returned from the fields to find something hanging on the porch. A wind chime made from river stones, bound together by thin strips of hide. It clicked softly in the breeze, its sound delicate and soothing. "You made this?" he asked. Waya nodded, not meeting his eyes. "It keeps bad spirits away, makes the home strong." Home. The word hit him harder than a fist. A day later, she tied small bundles of Apache herbs above the doorway, sage, bitterroot, and something fragrant he couldn't name. When he asked about them, she said simply, "Protection." Even the air inside the cabin felt different now, less empty, less forgotten, alive. Waya moved through the space quietly, but every step she took changed something. For the first time since his family died, Abel came back each evening to warmth, not silence. One night, as he watched her hang freshly washed clothes by the fire, her hair glistening in the dusk light, he caught himself staring. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was healing. And somehow, without meaning to, she was healing him too. Waya glanced up, catching him watching, and for a second he worried she'd retreat again. But she didn't. She simply held his gaze, steady and calm, before turning back to her work. Abel felt something shift inside him. Quiet, deep, undeniable. She wasn't just restoring the ranch. She was restoring him. She wasn't just fixing fences. She was mending the emptiness he'd carried for years. The heat of late afternoon pressed down on the Harkin ranch like a heavy blanket. Abel wiped sweat from his brow as he stacked the last bundle of hay in the barn. The rhythmic clunk of the pitchfork, the rustle of straw. Everything felt normal, steady, predictable, until he saw them. At first, it was only the faint disturbance in the dust by the north fence, fresh hoof prints cutting across the hard earth. Not from his horses. These tracks were sharper, heavier, too many for travelers passing through, too many for chance. Abel crouched beside them, running a calloused hand along the sand. Whoever had made these tracks hadn't bothered to mask their presence. Men like that didn't care who saw them. His jaw tightened. They're back. He straightened slowly, scanning the horizon. An uneasy silence crept across the fields, settling into his bones. Even the wind felt different, tense, watchful. Waya was on the porch, braiding strips of leather for a new set of reins. She sensed the shift in him instantly. "What is it?" Abel didn't answer. Not yet. He moved past her and into the cabin, grabbing his Winchester from above the hearth. Waya followed, the calmness draining from her face. The first rider appeared minutes later, then another, then 5 more. A whole line of men crested the ridge, riding toward the ranch with dust swirling behind them like a dirty storm cloud. Armed, angry, purposeful. Waya's breath hitched. Her hands trembled, dropping the leather onto the floorboards. Abel stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind him, locking her inside. The leader of the group, same man as before, but now wearing a twisted grin, pulled his horse to a halt just yards from the porch. His coat flapped open, revealing the revolver holstered at his hip. Behind him, the others fanned out in a quiet half circle, rifles resting on booted thighs. "Well now," the leader drawled, spitting into the dirt, "we figured you'd be stubborn, rancher, so we brought a little persuasion." Abel didn't flinch. He stood in the doorway perfectly still, his Winchester angled but ready. His broad shoulders filled the entrance, blocking any sight of the woman inside. "You rode onto the wrong land," Abel said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "State your business or turn around." The men snickered among themselves. "You got something of ours," the leader said. "A piece of property. She ran from us and we aim to get her back." His lips curled. "Apache girl, small, dark hair. You know the one." Abel's silence spoke louder than anything. The leader leaned forward in the saddle. "See, when we didn't find her last time, we figured maybe you hid her. And you know what? We don't like being lied to." One of the men lifted a lantern. "Maybe we start with burning that barn," he suggested. "Or the house. Fire sure makes folks cooperative." Another tapped the barrel of his rifle. "Or we tell the cavalry you're harboring a savage. They'd haul you off so fast your boots wouldn't touch the ground." Abel stepped down from the porch. Every rifle lifted a fraction. Dust swirled around his boots as he planted himself between the men and the cabin door. His eyes were steady steel, quiet, unwavering, lethal. "This ranch," he said, "isn't open for negotiation." The leader's smirk faltered, only a little. "You're going to get yourself killed over a worthless girl." Abel lifted the Winchester an inch, enough to send a clear message. His voice dropped to a low, gravel-coated warning. "She ain't worthless, and she ain't yours." The tension snapped tight like a drawn bow. Horses stamped nervously, picking up on the current in the air. A vulture circled overhead, silent and watching. "You're outnumbered," the leader said. "One man against all of us?" Abel didn't blink. "One good man can be enough." Behind the locked cabin door, Waya pressed her hand to her mouth, tears pooling in her eyes. She could hear every word, every threat, every promise, and the steady courage of the man standing outside because of her. The leader finally spat again, expression sour. "We'll be back, and next time we won't be so polite." They wheeled their horses away, disappearing into the approaching dusk like a pack of wolves denied a kill. Only when the last rider vanished did Abel lower his rifle. Inside, the door cracked open. Waya stood there, trembling so hard she could barely hold herself up. The reality of what had almost happened, what could still happen, washed over her all at once. Abel stepped to her, but she reached him first, gripping his shirt with shaking fingers. "Why?" she whispered, choking on the word. "Why risk your life for me?" Abel looked down into her tear-filled eyes full of fear, pain, and a trust she didn't want to feel. His answer was simple, quiet, true. "Because no one deserves to be hunted." She broke, collapsing against him in a flood of sobs he caught with both arms. And as he held her, fragile, shaking, desperate, he understood something with absolute clarity. The West wasn't made for weak hearts, but Abel Harkin had made his choice. He would die before he let them touch her. Night settled over the Harkin Ranch like a slow-falling curtain, soft and heavy. The desert wind quieted, leaving only the dry rasp of sagebrush and the distant hoot of an owl. Abel built a fire outside, the flames licking steadily at the wood, sparks drifting upward like tiny wandering stars. Waya sat close, wrapped in a blanket, her face lit by the amber glow. The firelight carved shadows along her cheekbones, making her look both fierce and fragile. Her hands trembled slightly, whether from fear, exhaustion, or something deeper, Abel couldn't tell. He added another log. "They won't be back tonight." She nodded, but her gaze remained distant. The flames reflected in her eyes like pieces of a life she no longer recognized. For a long while, they said nothing. It was Waya who finally broke the silence, her voice soft and trembling, as if she were lifting the lid off wounds that never had time to heal. "My brother died first." Abel didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply let the words come. "He was strong," she whispered. "Strong like the mountain lions. He fought the men who came into our camp. Fought until one of them shot him." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. "He fell near the fire. I saw him, trying to rise again." She pressed her fingers to her forehead. "I tried to reach him. My mother held me back." Guilt flickered through her expression like lightning. "Then they took her," Waya said. "My mother. They tied her hands, dragged her across the dirt. She shouted for me to run." Her breath hitched. "So I did. I ran into the darkness with the smell of blood and smoke behind me." The crackle of the fire filled the spaces between her words. "They burned our camp," she said. "I heard the screams. I heard the horses. I heard every death like it was happening under my own skin." Tears slipped down her face, glistening in the firelight. "I ran without looking back. I ran until my legs failed me." Abel's hand curled into a fist on his knee. Her pain was raw, brutal, and heartbreakingly familiar. She lifted her eyes to him. "Do you think less of me for running?" "No," Abel answered immediately, voice thick with feeling. "A person runs when there's no other choice." Waya studied him for a long moment. Then she asked quietly, "What about your family? Where are they?" He stared into the fire, the old ache rising like a ghost from the ashes. "My parents died first," he said. "Fever took them during a hard winter." His fingers tightened on the edge of the log he sat on. "My little brother, he died in a riding accident. Horse spooked, threw him against a rock. I was the one who found him." The memory scraped through him like broken glass. Waya's eyes softened with sorrow. "I am sorry. I spent years trying to fix things on this ranch," he said slowly. "Fences, barn walls, tools, everything except myself." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought if I stayed busy enough, I'd stop feeling the empty places." The fire crackled softly, its warmth settling into the cold corners of their grief. Waya moved her hand closer, just an inch, then another. "Loneliness is its own kind of wound," she murmured. Abel nodded. "One that never quite closes." Their hands rested side by side on the dusty ground, close enough that the warmth of her skin brushed his knuckles. With a hesitant breath, Waya let her fingers graze the back of his hand. She waited for him to pull away. He didn't. Instead, he turned his hand over slowly, palm up, offering, not demanding. Waya looked at him, her eyes shimmering with vulnerability and a flicker of something softer. She placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwined, tentative but sure, like two people stepping onto new, fragile ground together. The world around them seemed to exhale. The night felt less cold, the fire less harsh, and the silence between them shifted, not empty now, but full. Two broken souls finding a place where their pain could speak and be understood. Waya leaned slightly toward him, her shoulder brushing his. Abel didn't move away. He let the closeness settle between them, gentle and grounding. Above them, the stars watched quietly. Around them, the desert held its breath. And in the glow of that fire, a truth formed, fragile, beautiful, undeniable. Two wounded souls had found each other in the night. The days after their midnight confession passed quietly, almost gently, as if the desert itself didn't dare disturb the fragile bond forming between them. But inside Waya's chest, a storm was gathering. silent, relentless, impossible to ignore. She knew she didn't belong here, not on white man's land, not in a cabin built from sorrow and memories she barely understood, not beside a man who had already lost too much. She was danger wrapped in skin, and danger always came knocking on the door. One morning before the sun had risen high enough to burn away the night shadows, Waya stood in the kitchen, staring at the wooden table. A small piece of hide lay in front of her. She held a sharpened bone needle in one hand and began to carve a series of Apache marks into the leather. Symbols of gratitude, symbols of farewell. It was all she could leave behind. A message Abel would never fully understand, but she hoped he'd feel its meaning. Her breath shivered as she folded the small piece of hide and set it on the windowsill. She did not wake him. She did not say goodbye. Instead, she slipped out the back door, the dawn wind tugging at her hair as she crossed the yard. She moved past the corral, past the tool shed, past the fence she had helped him mend. Each step felt heavier than the last. By the time she reached the riverbank, her legs felt numb. The salt river shimmered silver under the early light, the same waters that had nearly swallowed her the day Abel found her. She knelt in the sand, her fingers digging into the cold grains. She had come here to leave, to disappear into the open land where danger and loneliness wouldn't drag anyone else down with her. But when she tried to stand, her body refused. Her throat tightened, her breath broke. And then the tears came, hard, aching sobs that tore through her like a sudden storm. She pressed her forehead to her knees, shaking uncontrollably. "I have no place," she whispered in Apache, voice cracking. "No people, no home." The wind answered, but not gently. It pushed against her, whipping sand across the riverbank. She curled in on herself, feeling as small and lost as she had the night her brother died. The snap of a twig behind her made her stiffen. She didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Abel stepped lightly, but she felt his presence settle beside her like the weight of a warm blanket. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, letting her finish crying, letting her be broken without asking why. When she finally lifted her face, he crouched next to her and draped his coat, his old, worn, heavy coat over her shoulders. "You left before sunrise," he said quietly. She looked away. "I did not belong." Abel exhaled, long and slow, staring out at the river. "Is that what you think? That you're just trouble on two legs?" She flinched, not at the words, but at how close they were to the truth she'd been living with. "I bring danger," she whispered. "Those men will return. They follow me. I will not let them hurt you, your land." "They already tried," he said, "and I'm still standing." "That is why I must go." He shook his head. "No, that's why you ran." Her breath hitched. He shifted closer, voice lowering with gentle certainty. "Waya, I don't own you. No one does. You're not something to be claimed or taken." His eyes softened, but the strength behind them was unshakable. "But you can choose where you want to be, and you can choose who you stand with." She swallowed hard, her chest rising with uneven breaths. "I do not know how to choose," she admitted in a trembling whisper. Abel reached out, not touching her, not yet, letting his hand rest in the space between them. "You don't have to make it today," he murmured, "but you don't have to run either." Waya stared at the dust, the river, the far line of the ranch stretching behind him. She saw the barn she had cleaned, the herbs she hung in the doorway, the wind chimes she crafted from river stones. She saw the man who shared firelight with her, who listened to her grief, who stood in front of armed men just to protect her breath. For the first time, her gaze lingered on the ranch, not with fear, but with something quieter, softer, almost like longing. Abel rose, offering his hand. Not a command, but an invitation. Waya hesitated. Then slowly she placed her fingers into his palm. And though she said nothing, her eyes stayed on the ranch longer than she meant to, as if she were seeing, for the first time, the shape of a home. The desert had a way of warning a man. Subtle shifts in the wind, a strange quiet falling over the land. The uneasy stillness that seeped into bone and instinct alike. Abel felt it before he saw anything. He stepped out onto the porch just as the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, smearing red across the sky like a fresh wound. Waya was gathering herbs near the shed, her silhouette sharp and graceful against the fading light. She looked peaceful, finally breathing like a woman no longer being hunted. Then Abel saw the dust plume, rising fast. Riders, many riders. His heart dropped into a cold, hard place. "They're back," he said, voice low and steady. Waya froze, eyes widening, fear flickering for only a heartbeat before something fiercer replaced it. Abel grabbed her wrist gently. "We don't have time. Into the storm cellar, now." "I can fight," she whispered. "You will," he said, "but not from the open." They dashed to the small hatch behind the house, the old root cellar Abel's father once used for winter stores. He pulled it open. "Stay down. Only come out when I call." She shook her head. "If you fall, I fall too." "Waya," he said firmly, gripping her shoulders, eyes locked with hers. "You're the reason I'm standing. Let me do this right." Her breath trembled, but she nodded. Abel closed the hatch just as the first horseman crested the hill. Dust swirled around the yard as 8 armed men rode into the ranch, their silhouettes black against the blood-red sky. The same leader as before, wearing a permanent sneer carved deep into his face, tugged his horse to a halt. He shouted over the pounding hooves, "End of the road, Harkin! You hid her. You lied. You cost us time. Now you're paying with your life." Abel stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, shoulders squared against the oncoming storm. "This land says otherwise." The men spread out, forming a half moon around the ranch. Rifles were cocked, revolvers glinted, horses snorted nervously at the tension in the air. The leader grinned. "You think that girl's worth dying for?" Abel didn't blink. "Yes," the man spat. "Then let's finish this." The world snapped open. Gunfire exploded into the air, sharp, cracking, merciless. Bullets screamed past the porch posts, splintering wood. Dust blew up in choking clouds as boots pounded, horses reared, and the valley echoed with chaos. Abel fired back, every shot deliberate, steady, controlled. He hit one man clean in the shoulder, dropping him from his horse. Another ducked behind a water trough, returning fire with a barrage that shattered the cabin window. Abel ducked behind a post, breath steady, mind clear. He had fought storms, droughts, and death before. But this was different. This time he fought for someone breathing in the dark beneath his feet. He didn't see Waya slip out the back entrance. Silent as shadow, swift as wind, Apache trained. She circled wide, staying low in the tall grass, keeping the barn between herself and the gunman. Her feet touched the earth with the precision of a predator. The men were focused on Abel. They didn't notice her. One rider swung to flank the porch. Waya moved. She darted forward and cut the horse's reins in a single quick slice of her knife. The horse spooked, rearing back violently, throwing the rider into the dirt. He hit the ground with a grunt, losing his gun. Another man turned at the commotion, but she was already slashing the next set of reins, sending the second horse bolting uncontrollably into the yard. Shouts erupted. Confusion rippled across the group. "She's here! The Apache girl's here!" Waya ducked behind a woodpile, breath burning, heart pounding, but her hands did not shake. Abel used their distraction. He stepped out and fired again, taking down the man aiming for her with terrifying precision. Bullets kicked up dust inches from Waya's feet. She rolled behind a trough, then sprinted toward the fence line, slicing more reins as she went. Horses bucked, screamed, scattered in every direction. One of the men tried to take aim at her. Abel's rifle roared first. The leader saw his men falling back, disarmed and dismounted, panic creeping into his eyes. "Retreat," he ordered. "This ain't worth dying for." They scrambled onto whatever horses were still mountable and tore across the desert, limping, bleeding, and defeated. Waya watched them vanish into the dying light. Dust hung in the air like smoke after battle. When the last hoofbeat faded, she turned toward the porch. Abel lowered his rifle slowly, and there she stood, strong, breathing hard, no fear left in her eyes. As the dust settled around them, their gazes met across the battered yard. The hunted girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who had chosen to fight, not for survival, but for a home. Dawn rose slowly over the Harkin ranch, washing the land in soft gold. The fields glimmered like a sea of wheat and dust, stretching endlessly beneath the waking sun. It was the first quiet morning in weeks. No gunfire, no hooves pounding toward danger, no fear hanging like smoke in the air. Just peace. A fragile, beautiful peace. Waya stood at the edge of the porch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. For the first time since she lost her tribe, the world didn't feel like it was closing in around her. There was warmth in the air. There was breath in her chest. There was something like hope stirring beneath her ribs. She let out a slow breath. The land answered with a soft whisper through the sagebrush. Behind her, the cabin door creaked open. Abel stepped onto the porch, boots quiet on the old wooden boards. He didn't say a word. He simply moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and steady. After a moment, he held out his hand, not demanding, just offering. An invitation, a choice. Waya looked at that hand for a long time, her pulse echoing faintly in her ears. The last few weeks unraveled through her mind like smoke. Running through darkness, losing everyone she loved, kneeling beside the river with no home left to return to, then waking in a cabin warmed by firelight, learning English with laughter in her voice, mending fences with Abel beside her, fighting off danger with her own hands and courage. And now this peace, this morning, this man. "I've been running all my life," she whispered, her voice cracked with the truth of it. Shadows of her past flickered behind her eyes, flames consuming her camp, the screams of her people, her mother dragged away in chains, her brother collapsing in the dirt. She had carried those ghosts across every mile of desert. But this, she looked out over the land again, her breath shaking but sure. "This feels like I finally stopped." Abel turned his gaze to her, quiet emotion softening the harsh angles of his face. "Then let this be your last stopping place." The words settled over her like warm ash, soft, heavy, undeniable. Not a plea, not a command. A simple truth spoken by a man who had lost enough to recognize a second chance standing right in front of him. Waya slowly placed her hand in his, her fingers curled around his palm with a gentleness that surprised them both. Abel's breath left him in a shaky exhale, the kind a man gives when a weight he carried alone finally slips off his shoulders. Together they stepped down from the porch and walked toward the fields. The morning sun climbed higher, brushing gold across Waya's braids and casting long shadows behind them. For years, Abel had lived in silence, patching fences to avoid patching his heart. For years, Waya had survived on fear and instinct alone, never expecting a home was something she deserved. But here, in the wide-open land where only the strong endured, two broken souls had found something rare, something more powerful than survival. They had found each other. The wind carried the smell of sage and new beginnings across the ranch. The horses grazed peacefully. The sky stretched wide and forgiving overhead. The Harkin Ranch was no longer a lonely outpost on the edge of the world. It was a home, rebuilt not from wood and rope, but from two hearts that refused to stay broken. In the West, where only the strong survive, they didn't just live, they found each other. And now the question lingers for anyone listening to their story. If fate offered you one final place to stop running, would you take it?